everybody. This is Monraj and Rosenbaum are humans coming to you
So we claim.
yeah, from January 2023. And this is a grab bag episode. We don't have a plan. We don't have any guests. Ben and I are just going to talk at each
We're
other.
just rattling around in this big empty peapod of a transatlantic virtual recording studio.
That's right. That's right. So I was trying to think about what I might want to talk about. One thing that is on my mind right now is kind of navigating time for myself, for my family, for my job. I mean, this is always on my mind. And we've just had January 1st. My New Year's resolution was actually to work less and stress less. So I was thinking about the kind of productivity traps that are so easy to fall into.
I'd like to talk about time and what's going on and plans. Yes, I have things to say. I'm in an interesting place with the current work in progress.
Well, why don't you start with that? Because my thoughts are amorphous. So what's the current work in progress? Is this
I'm working on the choice of games.
Choice of games.
Choice of games, The Ghost and the Golem, which has sort of been announced on Steam. And so there's kind of a lot of deadline pressure. Like I feel and I like the Jason from Choice of Games is great, my editor there. Proposed a bunch of like cons we could go to, like virtual, like there's like some kind of Steam extravaganza fest where you can like play demos of lots of games of all kinds, and people like somehow do some like either a Twitch stream of them or something, which is maybe more. I sent you that email actually about So I have a thought for how to do. Yeah. There's no particular way to do a Twitch stream of a choose your own adventure game, but what I have this concept of doing it as a kind of like a reading, but with an audience participation, with like a rowdy Zoom audience making comments. Anyway, but the interesting thing that I just noticing today, writing a long work. I mean, I started out as a short story writer, and I feel like for a long time, my natural length was like 1,500 words. Like I would sit down and like if something, and after that, it would get harder. And like I would, then as I got better at it, I would write longer things. But I would have to start plotting and thinking and whatever. And like novels were really hard for a long time. And I know people with the opposite experience. I know people who were like at the start of their careers, like I can't clear my throat in 20,000 words. I mean, it's like I gotta but that I was definitely like master of precision, which I kind of missed. Like I don't know that I know how to write short stories like that anymore now that I've sort of made this very painful and long, complicated transition. I mean, I have to get it back somehow if I'm hoping to have like a period. Yeah.
I mean, I'm in a similar place because I realized like the last year and a half, I've been mostly trying to finish up these ongoing book length projects. So there's the cancer memoir, there's novel, etc. So there's a screenplay, these long things that take a lot of sustained effort.
Which screenplay? Do I know about the screenplay?
I don't know if you know about the screenplay. Which I guess the screenplay kind of falls in between. It's a pilot episode, so it's short. It's not under contract to anybody or anything like that. It's I want to try it out, and I talked to Melinda Snodgrass, who is my editor, one of my editors on Wildcards, along with George R. R. Martin. And Melinda said to break into screenwriting at this point, like the first step is to write a pilot script for a series and a treatment for a movie, right? So so I took this summer I took screenwriting classes. And we're actually about to offer another one with the same instructor through the SLF in a month or so. And I took a couple and wrote 3 pilot drafts, one of which is pretty complete and I'm happy with it. So, but it was a huge learning curve. It was a lot of work. It was, I wrote 150 pages or so between the 3 of them. And I have not written short stuff in so long. I almost feel like I've forgotten how. The last couple of days, I started reading short stories again, because I've also been reading book.
That's what I've got to do.
To like remind myself of the rhythms and the pacing and all of that. Anyway.
I need to, at some point when I'm between long projects, I need to I plan to be like, okay, now I'm doing an immersive like short story reading jag and getting my mojo back, because it does really, I don't know if that's appropriate to say getting my mojo back. Anyway, is my my vibe back.
Yeah.
Is that no, I'm just because I'm like, is Mojo actually like a important cultural practice that I've okay, anyway.
Oh wait, I have a tangent.
Yeah.
Which, because you're here and this reminded me, yesterday I was talking to Jed and I said something about like, but that wouldn't be kosher. And then I was like, wait, is kosher okay? And is anyone gonna feel like that's an appropriate term?
I
And I
approve
was,
that use of kosher, but I don't know. I mean, it's anyway,
it's
yes, go on.
it's certainly not a slur, right? I mean,
No.
it's
No,
to
no, it's
be clean and done well and
right.
ethically and all of that.
Sure.
But nonetheless, anyway, that was just my
No, that's
tangent.
a good point. Well, it's an interesting question, or on tangents and tangents and
Yeah,
tangents.
yeah,
That's the
right.
risk of grab bag is we have nothing to get anyway. But we're gonna wrap it around. But kosher, I my when I love when goyim say kosher. I feel like this is and I think this is,
Yeah.
I mean, there is a piece of this conversation, like the conversation about cultural appropriation is very
Hmm.
important. Like it's a very
Yep.
vital, important thing. But it's important also that it not become a caricature. Like the
Right.
problem that people are addressing when they talk about cultural appropriation is a power asymmetry in which, like a billion Native American people are writing books and nobody publishes them, and then a white person comes along and writes some like even and there's two separate problems. One is bad representation because they're probably writing a crap book about cowboys and Indians, and
Hmm.
then the other is that even if they're not, it's like suddenly they get all the limelight for that,
Yeah.
right? Or like or like a hairstyle that looks when people who invented it, they get treated as if it's dirty and unprofessional, but then if somebody then the white people wear it and it's cool, right? So,
Yeah.
but that's about asymmetry. But there's a danger of taking this to the of like there's a way in which just like the reaction to like being criticized for representation is like, okay, I'll only write white people, which is like maybe also not the best plan.
Hmm.
Like similarly with appropriation, there's a danger of it being like everyone stay in your lane, don't share anything, which is weird because that means then that the global culture that gets exported and that everyone has a part of is white culture. So everyone can play Brahms, but nobody can play some Japanese composer. Everybody can paint like Van Gogh, nobody can paint like Hokusai, which is basically saying, again, like white culture gets to be the
Yeah.
export culture that dominates the world, and everybody else's culture is like can only be done. You know what I mean? Like that is
Yeah.
also a
Yeah.
problem. So there's some, and I've probably said this in the podcast before, but I will briefly mention the Kippa Yarmulke example, because the Yarmulke tallis example, which is my canonical way of understanding this from Jewish culture.
Hmm.
So the little
Okay.
hat you wear when you go to a synagogue is a kippah,
Uh-huh.
right?
Okay.
And I mean, we're a Reform synagogue, so not everybody wears them, but we're like we're not a Reform synagogue. We're a liberal synagogue, so it's a mix of different non-Orthodox streams of Judaism. And I know some people in our synagogue who are miffed if guests come and don't wear a kippah.
Hmm.
Like you're supposed to wear a kippah. It's a sign of respect. So when you go to a
Right.
synagogue, you should put on a kippah. Sometimes it's gendered. If you're in a more traditional synagogue, then rules are different for men or women. But whatever, feel free to wear a kippah. And if you're a man in a traditional synagogue and you don't put on a kippah, then people might be annoyed. That's an that's an open symbol. That's an externally symbol. We've created this symbol. It's part of our culture. We want you to adopt it when you're
So
coming
I'll
to
say
visit us.
I didn't actually know that. Like I know
Now,
about
I'm
the
not
wait, can I
right. Now, I'm not, not now I should
yeah.
qualify this by saying I'm not sure that everybody should just wear kippah all the time.
Right, right, but it wouldn't have even it wouldn't have occurred to me to put it on going into if I were going to visit
Well, and also
a
you're a
temple.
woman, so in a traditional synagogue,
Yeah, yeah,
they wouldn't expect you to because you're a woman. In a liberal synagogue, they wouldn't expect you because not everyone wears a kippah. So it's not
yeah,
necessarily,
yeah.
but
Okay,
like certainly if you're a man going to a traditional synagogue, they would expect you to wear a kippah as a sign of respect. That's
okay.
it's like or taking your shoes off in a mosque, I guess, right?
Right, right.
So in a way, now on the other hand, it doesn't mean that I guess this is not a perfect analogy because I don't necessarily want everyone to always run around wearing a kippah everywhere. But it is like a symbol that's not reserved, whereas a tallis is reserved. Like you don't even let Jewish kids wear a tallis. You get a tallis when you have your bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah.
Mm,
Like you wear a
hmm.
tallis when you become an adult. It actually is a symbol that you are capable now and like competent to like perform, to like be an actor in this play, right? Like to
Right.
actually. So you don't want somebody to just randomly wear a tallis. I mean, whatever. There's lots of different. I mean, there are streams of Judaism that are post-denominational that are like everybody should do everything, whatever. That's fine. But like, it's very typical that that's a reserved
Mm,
symbol. And I feel like if that's the way to think about it is like, well, what do people want you to adopt?
yeah.
You. I mean, uh, I mean, I have a feeling now. Like let me know. I have the feeling that like you lent me for several WisCons running a Salwar Kameez, right?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And I know a lot of like Indian American where it's like you go to an Indian wedding and people are like, want you to wear Indian clothes. Like they're like, yeah, you should.
So it's complicated. I would say
But there are also reserved symbols because there's probably some things.
I would say it's here are a couple elements of it to think about. One is the Homelander versus diaspora, because
Yeah.
Homelanders are often incredibly comfortable with people who are visiting wearing saris for a wedding or whatever else, or just to walk around in the street, because they're the
majority. Yeah.
They're the majority, right? They're not under threat. Whereas diasporans, if I choose to wear a sari to work to teach in, it could hurt me professiononly. And it's not gonna, and it's not going to probably hurt a white woman who does so because she, and so I get seen as too ethnic, not professional, etc. Not everywhere. My department is pretty progressive. I think I'd actually be fine, but in a lot of places it would hurt me. And so there's a difficulty when people are wearing symbols that would casually that you can't wear without
that you would be oppressed for wearing. Which actually, I want to revise what I was saying. This actually is important because it actually is the same thing. Like that is the same as a kippah, right? Because that's the same reason that I don't necessarily. It's precisely the same. For where you get a lot of more anti-Semitism if you wear a kippah on the subway than you do if you don't. So people, if it became a fashion statement, would annoy me. So there's actually 3 categories. There are cultural symbols that you wish to be adopted broadly, like you want everyone to adopt these. I mean, one obvious example of this is like religions that have an export, like they would like you to, like, do you know what I mean? Like they would like you to become, it's not cultural appropriation to actually convert to Islam and become a Muslim, because that's actually kind of part of the point, right? It's a world religion. Similar, so there are open symbols. Then there are closed symbols, like this is a symbol reserved for this culture. You shouldn't wear a tallis unless you're, ready to take part as a Jew in this thing. And then there are symbols, which I think is actually the category that the salwar kameez you lent me at WisCon and the kippah that you would be invited to put on at Migvan fall into, which is these are symbols you should use if you were an invited guest. Like they're still ours. We're letting you use them in this context because we want, we invite you to use this because in this context, we're saying that enhances our experience. Right. And we've created this space and we want you to engage in these symbols when you're in this space. As opposed to you just take them home and use them whenever you want, which is a different thing.
And then I guess I'd add, there's so a sari, salwar kameez are not religious symbols. So a bindi is a little trickier, right? And bindis are something that have gotten worn a lot as fashion. And we see white models walking down runways with glittery bindis, right? And people sometimes get upset about that. And part of it is that it's complex because we also wear them as fashion now, right? I'm going to a wedding, I wear a sari, I'm going to wear a bindi that matches the color of my sari, right? Sure. But where it comes from culturally,
but there's a distinction between using a symbol in a fashionable way and that it's purely fashion.
But I'm just saying, let me just finish the framing. So the where it comes from culturally is the sindoor and the sort of the vermilion powder mark that is made after you're married, right? So it's a sign of being a married woman in Hinduism, right? Yeah. And there's sort of a version of it that's like a little black dot that we put on little kids. And so red or black are kind of coded and have strong places in the culture. And I think often what people object to is, even if they themselves are never going to wear the vermilion, sometimes it's a dot, sometimes it's a whole streak down a center parting in your hair, it feels wrong, off, weird for people to wear the bindi without knowing that's where it came from, right? Even like I was raised Catholic, I wasn't raised Hindu, I'm not religious myself now, so it doesn't ever have a religious context for me, but I'm aware that my great-great-grandparents, like if I go back far enough, it was religious, right? And so there's a weight to it, and you want people to know that weight, even if you yourself have come to using it primarily in a fashion kind of way. I don't know if that makes sense. And there are even times
it does make sense.
There are times when I feel where I want to feel particularly Tamil, where I might actually pull out the little black ones and wear them, right? Which is not about fashion anymore, right? It's about
Right.
ethnic solidarity. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like all these
Yeah.
things are interrelated, right? And at any given moment. So
Yeah. So anyway, but I'm still proposing, and I want to know what you think, that there's these three categories, right? And because so to get back to kosher, like the influence of the Yiddish language on English
yeah,
is something I'm proud of. Like that's
yeah,
something that I feel like was a good call of English to adopt Yiddishisms.
yeah,
I don't know if I ran through the list of every single one I approve of. I don't know, but I that's something where, and that is a that is also a real feeling. Like it's a
yeah,
real feeling to feel like you're being invaded. It's also a real feeling to feel like, and there is potentially a real deprival if the pendulum swings all the way in the other direction, to be like ignored, to be like, well, we're not
yeah,
going to incorporate. Well, hands off. We're not touching anything of yours.
yeah,
You're not part of this, because what you want is not syncretism is great. Mixing is great. The problem with cultural appropriation is that if people don't have the sense of ownership and control and an equal say, right? If there's a power asymmetry, and like I get to take your stuff and you don't get
yeah,
to say anything about it, and you know what I mean? That's and it's looked on differently when I do it, and like you were saying,
yeah,
like I'm oppressed for doing this thing, my own culture symbol, and somebody else is slaughtered for it who doesn't even know what that means. But on the other hand, like the other feeling is important to honor as well. That it's like, I
yeah,
like when goyim say kosher because it means that they have learned something and have and as you
right.
say, it's actually using it correctly to be like, is that kosher? That is very Jewish question, to be like, can we take this donation? Is that kosher? That is
Yeah,
literally using it
yeah.
correctly.
Okay.
Like, so there's a way in which it's like yeah, I mean, I just feel like like both
So
sides of the thing are very important, but it's sometimes
yeah,
treated very one-sidedly nowadays, where it's like we care about the people not feeling invaded, but we also, but we don't, like, the
right.
joy of sharing is also an important part of the conversation.
Well,
Like,
and there's maybe I'd agree with that. There's maybe even a particular power to like your language becoming part of the dominant language,
yeah,
right? And
sure,
so
exactly.
I threw in the chat. Um, I don't know whether you've ever run across Mina Kandasamy. She's a Dalit poet, and she
Mhm.
has this poem, Mulligatawny Dreams, that I teach sometimes, and I always think of. It opens with this list of words that have come to
Uh-huh.
English, right? That
Yeah,
they
yeah.
were, so it's anaconda, candy, cash, catamaran, cheroot, coolie, corundum, curry, ginger, mango, mulligatawny, patchouli, puppadum, rice, tatty, teak, vetiver. And, like these when I hear someone use the word cash every once in a while, I
Uh-huh.
think, that's not your word. Like you don't know that's not your word.
Yeah.
It's your word now. So, but
Yeah, it is
it's
now. Right.
right. So it's fine, but it's
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
There's
and that's an interesting angle too. Like, is it your word? That's interesting because it's like, is
yeah,
kosher your word? Like it is, but
yeah,
also like, yes, I mean, it's interesting if you've completely forgotten the origin of it, then that's also a kind of like, the sweet spot is for you to use it and understand where it comes from. Like,
right,
because like people, cultures want to be known. They want to
right,
have autonomy over what they contribute to the world, but they also want to be seen. And like, so to completely be like, oh, that's a black box, I don't know, your culture is completely obscure to me, I don't understand it, can be just as bad as being like, oh, I'm gonna like dress
right,
up like you for Halloween because I get it. When you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like
right,
both are a kind of not knowing you, right?
right.
And like the knowing is the thing that creates connection, and an I vow relationship is like
Mm-hmm.
engaging with things with an awareness, which includes, and I mean, it's complicated because a culture is not a person. So like, you can't get permission from a culture. Like, you can't literally ask every single person. So
Right, right.
so you're always in a situation of like guessing and hoping and apologizing if you get it wrong. But like, there's a way in which it's like, I feel like there's a Scylla and Charybdis, like
Right.
uh, both ends of the spectrum are things that anyway. So the question to ask is not like, oh gosh, I'm using something that's from another culture that's clearly bad. The question to ask is like, is it? How do they feel about this? Like, like,
Yeah,
that's why I stumbled over Mojo, because I'm like, is that a thing? Like, how? I don't actually know. I don't
yeah.
know how people for whom Mojo is actually somehow part of their real serious cultural context, how they feel about people saying, I've lost my mojo.
We
Like,
should We should
do they
chat.
feel about it the way I feel about
Yeah.
kosher, or do they
Right.
feel about it very differently than that, which could
Yeah.
entirely be the case. Anyway, so back to the summer. End of tangent, unless you have more to say about it.
I think I can stop. I'm like, am I at the end of the tangent? I think I would just say that we're kind of saying the same thing about the words that I was saying about bindi. It's not that I don't want people to wear bindis. I want them to know. I want them to know enough to wear it with respect and understanding. And
Yeah.
I guess the last thing I'd say is that sometimes a lot of times this gets framed as like white people learning about everybody else, but obviously like in this conversation it's me non-Jewish asking about a Jewish thing. Sure. But it's also very much a part of diaspora, right? Like trying to like reach for these things that maybe you had ownership of once, but then you moved to the US when you were 2 and your parents wanted you to assimilate and you learned English and you forgot your Tamil, and like now you're trying to reconnect and learn it again. And there's always this anxiety, am I using it correctly, right? And and am I going to get called out by the homelanders for like, what are you saying? So anyway, lots of situations where this comes up. So okay, so you were talking about Moja.
Back to short stories and projects.
Oh, yes, short stories.
So we were saying we'd forgotten about how to write short stories, and we're going to, so I have to deep dive at some point and learn how to write short stories. And then I think there were a couple other layers. Originally, I was talking about the work in progress and the insight. Then I think you were talking about something that we might.
Well, I was talking about
screenplays.
Screenplays, but more I was talking about time. I think was where we
started. Okay, well, we'll get time is the deepest underlying level. So we're going last in, first out. So the thing I was going to say about the stage I was at with the work in progress, which is funny, is that like, so now there's a bunch of like announcements around it and stuff. There's like, there's sort of like, I know that they're going to be maybe participating in like cons and panels, whatever. So like the pressure is on that I should in fact get it done. And I doesn't look great at the moment. Like I do a lot of tracking. I do a lot of like word count calculations, my cat vacuuming, which, a phrase for those listening who don't know, meaning like things writers do to distract themselves, like, oh, that cat seems really dusty. I write little.
Really, sorry, like changing fonts is a key.
Yes, exactly. Like, is this the right font? Exactly. So I do a lot of like, I've now have built up like an entire like repository of like scripts that I run when I start and work that like measure the word count and draw the graph and like predict whatever. Like it's completely hilarious how much analysis there is. So how much like unnecessary project management. But anyway, but the thing is that like my spreadsheet, if you will, or my set of Ruby scripts does not say that I'll be done in March. Like most optimistically, it's like June, and I'm like, I can do. So I'm really trying to like rein in my tendency to spread everything out, force myself, make all these hard decisions to like not have things happen or have them happen off screen or have them combine different things.
Let me pause for 1 sec, because we didn't really define choice of games, and for anyone who's coming in right now, just it's if you think of a classic choose your own adventure from when you were a kid, it's that kind of story where it's done as a narrative phone game, but where the writer has set up multiple paths and you're choosing which ones to follow. And it's, in terms of writing, you end up having to write a lot more than you would normally because you have to write all the paths. And so what Ben's saying now is that his temptation is to keep branching and keep branching. Like, keep going off and doing like it's a tree, right? And like,
I mean, it's worth also pointing out that the interesting thing about choice of games specifically, as opposed to choose your own adventure books, is it's not a tree. So choose your own adventure book actually looks like, now I'm making motions with my hands that podcast can't see. It actually looks like a branching tree, like there's a single root node, and you might get a loop, but the loop is essentially meaningless then, because your loop is like literally you're back where you started. So it's really, except for occasional loop to be funny, it's really just a tree. Whereas choose your own adventure games actually looks like what looks like that? It branches out and then it comes back in again, and then branches out again and it comes back in again.
It reminds me of that kind of Moorish arc that has the OG, like the kind of intricate patterning, but has that kind of shape to it, right?
Right. It's kind of as a shape of
I'm trying to remember what that shape is called. There's a word for it. It's not OG, is it? Anyway,
I don't
I
know.
could
But
look
in
it
any
up.
event, it kind of goes out and then comes back together again. And
Yeah.
typically, like chapter 2 will always take place after chapter 1. Unlike in a choose adventure book, the chapter events in chapter 2 will be
Yeah.
the same no matter which path you take, as it were. So you're actually making multiple decisions and building up statistics to then. But the decisions you made in chapter 1 matter. They influence the text in chapter 2, and later in the game they will turn out to be important, and so on. So there's a bunch of so yeah, so you're giving the illusion of endless free branching while in fact you're trying to keep it relatively tight under control. So you're not actually writing, you're not actually, if for the reader, in a choose your adventure books, you have to write, if you write n words, the reader will be reading log n words. There were the logarithm of like essentially they're just one path through this giant branching thing,
Yep.
one small line through that arc. And in this way, you're trying to do better than that in terms of what you preserve. But still, you're definitely writing like it is now already like 2.5 times the length of the unraveling, and I'm not done, right? In terms of actual just number of words.
Wow.
So it's more. It's not like factorially more or whatever, but it's more. Anyway, so yes, I'm trying to exercise restraint, and also just write fast. But the interesting thing that happened, just I was going to say, is that it's also got more exciting because 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 what I was originally saying, my natural length being 1,500 words, I don't feel like a natural novel writer. When I'm writing something really long, that whole middle part is like, I don't know, it's like you're running a marathon, you're jogging, you're out, and you just have to forget that there's an end. If you're running and it's a really long run, and it's like the idea of crossing the finish line, you have to banish that from your mind. You have to just be in a world like, because if you're like, I can make it, it's like that. At least I find you burn out. You lose hope. You can't. So I just have to be like, this is all there is. All I am doing is running. All there was is running. There is only running. Like I am here at this moment running. I heard a vague myth once that there's a finish line, but that is probably, let's forget about that. All there is, right? So every day when writing a novel, it's like, how many words did I write? It's not like how close am I to the end? Have I gotten how's this going to turn out? It's like, I got this many words done.
Yeah.
You don't do that?
I don't think that's my experience. No.
Well, maybe, you may be more of a natural novel writer. I think it's an adaptation for the fact that I can't.
No, I think it's almost the reverse. That sounds kind of great to me, to like be in the I'm just running phase. That's almost what I want to do this year in a different context, but maybe we'll get to that, maybe not. But I've been having aspirations towards being like Dickens and just writing these endless things that will just keep going. Anyway, leaving that aside, when I write novels, I think what I do to cope with the murky middle is I set smaller internal endpoints, right?
Okay.
So I'm always still working towards an endpoint. So maybe it's the end of part 1, end of part 2, and it's something that has a close enough horizon that I can see it.
Well, I think this may also have to do with the fact that I'm such a pantser. So if I was more of a plotter and I actually knew what part 1 and part 2 and part 3 entailed, I might be able to do that and be like, oh, well, this is the chapter where this happens. I'm almost there. I'll get that done. But the fact is that I'm so often like in the middle of the novel. I also have no idea how it ends or when it ends or what the hell is going to happen. So it's not, there really isn't any alternative except how many words did I write today? Are we make, am I heading for the end? And now, and I mean, for this novel, I have always had a novel. I mean, it's a game, but I think for writing, it's a novel. For experiencing it, it's a game. But writing it feels pretty much like writing a novel. It feels like I have had a general idea. I'm like setting up things and waiting them for to fall down, and I kind of know the arc of the general. Okay, it takes over these 3 days in May of 1881, and the basically the events that are either going to happen or not happen over the course of that time. But I don't really know how it's gonna work. Like I don't know, you know what I mean? Like it's the vaguest of ideas. So I don't know what I'm gonna actually have all the moving pieces be and how it's gonna play out. So now it's the point where I am terrified but also excited because I begin to grasp the shape of it, and I'm beginning to make like I'm close enough to the end that that's sort of like it's sort of like I've been running through darkness, and now you could see where you're gonna end up. Like you could see the finish line in the murky distance. Might not make it in time, but it is like, oh, this is actually all to a purpose. Like it will, like it can converge, and so it feels more like I'm beginning to be freed up to make more structurally interesting decisions in the sense that I'm like, that I can fully grasp their consequences. So up till now, I've been doing things like, but up till now, I've been doing things like, there'll be a romance plot, and I'll be like, okay, well, in this scene, I guess, it becomes clear there's a clear intimation of interest, or like a funny delayed, thing where it's like you almost, but then you're
Mm-hmm.
interrupted from, but it's sort of like just kicking the ball down the road and being like, well, this stirs the pot, this makes things more interesting, but with actually no idea how it ever ends up. And now I'm close enough to be like, oh, this is where the decision would be made, right? Like
Right.
here's the decision point that actually then is the final thing. You know what I mean? So it's like I'm
Yeah.
actually feel like I finally have the like I'm making decisions that actually are final, rather than just like how to keep this scene interesting and introduce more complications that I'll have to deal with later.
Mm-hmm.
If you see what I mean. Anyway,
Yeah.
so that's the stage that I'm at. Um,
Ah,
which it also is interesting motivation wise, because I'm suddenly feeling this mode of just like, I'm just like, what, how the hell? Because so often in the middle, I'm like, how do I trick myself into writing today? You know?
mm,
And then I reach this stage, and knock on wood, cane and horror, I don't know how long it'll last, but I'm like, you know, how can I squeeze out more writing minutes? Like, will there be time between dinner and, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Between lunch
right,
and dinner?
right.
Like, can I sneak away? Because like it's all, in a ferment. And that's the nice part. I mean, the fear of not getting it done in time is the bad part, and the nice part is the fact that it's got a pull now. It's not like I have to
Yeah.
constantly like drag myself to the keyboard and bribe myself
Yeah.
for writing today. It's more like, it's like even some of the things that I do that are sort of like bribes, like, okay, I'll go do this thing first as a procrastination. I'm like, can I skip that? And just like
And just right.
I'm talking myself out in the other direction, like probably,
Yeah.
instead of being
I
like,
actually
I'll answer email, but first. Anyway.
I think this question of like what generates that internal pull is interesting. For short stories, one things that I have always done, is that I think about it, and I don't usually sit down to write right away, right? So I think
Hmm.
about it in the shower. I think about, like, I'm sort of working out bits of, this is a new story. I'm working out bits of
Yeah.
it, kind of figuring out who the characters are. And usually there comes a point where I've started writing dialogue in my head
Mhm.
where it starts feeling urgent. And that's when I
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
that's
interesting.
what that's when I go to the computer and start
Hmm.
actually writing it down. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it has to
Huh.
get to, because
Huh.
that's the, I know that's the energy that will carry me through
Yeah. Yeah.
drafting, right?
That's a
So
really good point. Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah,
I mean, I used to a very, intentionally not write. I can't afford to do that at this point in this project, but I used to intentionally like not write too many words. And, there's the
right.
whole parking with the car pointed downhill. So like stopping
Yeah,
in the middle of the scene that you really want to finish. Yeah. But anyway, so it's kind of interesting. This is that on a global level, though. Those are
right.
tricks to get me to write tomorrow. And now I sort of feel like there's this
I mean,
convergence of factors where,
I sort of
anyway.
wish I could send you off on a retreat, because like my experience of writing retreat
Yeah.
is that's like the ideal time to go on a retreat, is when you
Mm.
are, really want to
Ready
work on
to rock and
something
roll. Yeah.
and you don't have time in your daily life to write as
Yeah.
much as you'd want
Yeah.
to, right? And so
Yeah.
to go someplace where you don't have to do anything except write is, um it's just very
Yeah.
helpful. You just make some progress so much faster. I think it's like
Yeah.
four
Yeah.
times as fast in my
Yeah,
experience.
that's a
So
point. I may need something like that, but anyway.
even if you can go away for a weekend, right? Like if you can, it
Yeah.
doesn't have to
Yeah.
be a lot. It doesn't have to be a 10-day retreat. Just like walk away
Sure.
from the world for a little bit. Might
Yeah.
might anyway. If you're feeling time
Yeah.
pressured,
Well, I am
so
feeling time pressured. I don't know that
yeah,
I don't know that I can afford to do a retreat, but I certainly am going to postpone and skimp and push the other things to the corners of life to try to make more
right,
room.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
insofar as that's possible, there's other demands. But
Well,
anyway,
that takes us back to the time question,
it
right?
does.
So there
Nice
we go.
segue.
So Ben has a full-time day job, right? Full time?
No, it's not full time. It's
It's not
half
full
time.
time. It's half-time, a half-time
So
day job
and
as a
it's interestingly scheduled, because I'm living in Switzerland and working with people on the East Coast. So the great thing about my day job is it's halftime and nobody's up until the afternoon. Like they're all
ah,
asleep. So there's
interesting.
no way, even if I wanted to work in the morning, like I'm not, there's no temptation to, because nobody wants anything from me. And the
Right.
first obligatory meeting of the day is 4 p.m. my time. Like there's a 10 a.m. stand up. That's 4 p.m. for me. So, and I'm in a situation where like I'm theoretically half-time, but I'm 1099. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
paying billing by the hour. And it's a fixed price contract. So they're delighted if I work less. Like if I manage to get everything done in less than half time, that's like they just keep
Right.
more money. So
Sure.
because they're paying me time and materials, but they're getting fixed price, right? So
Right, right,
so we're
right.
and I intentionally I have learned over the years to intentionally set up situations like that where it's like they will be because there's a if you're in a startup that's venture capital funded, that's where I started out in the world in
Hmm.
software. That's the opposite. Like there is the however nice that people are that you're working with and however much you're all in together, like there's a structural incentive to squeeze as much hours as they possibly can out of you because the pool of money is going away and you have to have conquered the world before it's
Right.
gone.
Yeah.
But this is the opposite. So anyway, so like, but of course, then there's crises that I have to deal with. So in fact, I think I have ended up working a little more than half time so far. But I'm always have the ambition of working less than half time if I can just get this done. So
And then
yeah,
from my side of things, I have it's interesting. I hadn't really thought about the hours like time of day thing in a while, but my day job's in academia. I teach 2 classes a semester, and it's usually either Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday.
yeah,
Um, and there have been long stretches where I was teaching at 9 in the morning, one point maybe even like 7:30 or 8 in the morning, or in the evening. But for the last year or two, they've been scheduling me in the afternoons for my teaching. And
yeah,
so I teach. So I go to campus around 11. I come home around 4:30, depending on traffic. And it means that in theory, all of my mornings are free for writing, right?
yeah, yeah,
And this is where I actually have the time now, but assuming I've done my prep for my classes in advance and so on, I could write for 3 hours every morning. There is
hmm
nothing to stop me from that. But I don't, but I don't. And so
sure,
like, this is one thing I've been sort of struggling with is I keep myself busy with lots of other things. I'm doing
hmm
useful things all the
right, right, right,
time.
sure,
But I've been trying to figure out how do I make myself
yeah,
prioritize writing. And it helped when I was going out. There was a stretch where I would like get up, make my tea, and just go out to my writing shed.
yeah,
It's Chicago in January. It's snowing right now. It's
right. So that's
hard. I can still do
that's
it. I
a
mean,
hard,
I've got a heater in the shed, but you've got to like go
yeah,
out, turn on the heater,
yeah,
come back
yeah,
inside, wait half an hour, then go back out again.
right, right. Come back
So
inside to make the coffee. Yeah.
yeah, so it's harder to motivate to do that.
Right, right, definitely. That's not
It's
a downward
even
slope.
yes, it's not a downward slope. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
can't you yeah, I try to I think about it like that. Like I try to position, downward slopes that if I accidentally slip, I will slide into writing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like everything. But I think it's the way I think about the job only necessarily starting at 4 p.m. my time. I mean, sometimes I have meetings 2 p.m. or whatever, but like essentially that it's confined to the afternoon is I mean, if I have a day where I don't have early meetings and I can start at 4 p.m., that gives me like that allows me to like fail to write multiple times, right?
Yeah.
That's the way I think about it. Is it's like I can have because I will, because when I used to try to write an hour when I used to work full time and I used to try to write an hour a day before work. There so often, like that was my ambition. Sometimes I would manage, but so often something would come up. There would be some chore, or some misunderstanding, or some call, or some, or
Hmm.
some distraction, or some like, or like internal like motivation lapse where I'm like, maybe I'll just look at this book I haven't looked at in a while, and then oops, the time's gone.
Yeah.
I'm like I can like space out and completely lose the plot and like suddenly realize that and I've wasted a bunch of time. And the great thing about having a large block of time carved out is that can happen like 3 times and I still manage to write.
Yeah.
I can have like 3 complete abject failures and like have like disorganization, and it's still only 1 p.m. So it's like,
Yeah.
and
No,
then
I
I
mean,
finally manage, and I end up,
yeah.
I can still end up writing for 2 hours if I, so that's yes,
Yeah. I don't think I can carve out quite that much time, but
sure,
I also think I can easily fill that much time.
right,
I can
right,
spend
right,
six
right, right.
hours on useful
Oh, sure,
procrastination,
sure.
right?
Well, I'm
So
not saying that I'm not saying
yeah,
it's a guarantee and like or
but
that it's
yeah,
not a
yeah,
struggle, but I'm just saying what I like about the luxury is I don't think about it like why didn't I spend all this time writing? I know myself enough that I'm like there will be this is a difficult like
yeah,
it's like mounting a feisty horse, right?
yeah,
To get to get into writing is like managing to get into the saddle of this fucking Bronto. It's like I with enough it's possible to get better at the technique. It's possible to
Right.
it's good to have a bunch of tries. Like I can do it. It's no excuse not to get on the horse
Right.
that it's a bucky bride. But I just assume like I don't treat each time I get thrown from the
Yeah.
horse as like what's wrong with me. I just treat it as like, yeah, that's that horse.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying not to beat myself up about it. I'm a little frustrated with myself right now because I did, I've had stretches in life where I was very disciplined about it, and it
Yeah.
feels, I grew up in New England. I have a puritanical mental
Uh-huh.
framework,
Yeah.
like I should be able to like exert discipline and power through, and it feels like I'm just failing to do that right now. And so I'm, I know
Yeah, I mean, one of the
Ben is
best
me.
things, I feel like
Yeah.
one of the best things that I ever did was give up on the idea of me having willpower.
Yeah. So I don't know how to give up on that. So perhaps therapy
Well,
is
no,
the
but this is
correct answer, but
well, maybe
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, yeah.
All I'm saying is, not that I give up on the idea of getting things done, but I gave
Right.
up on the idea of me doing it because of my virtue of willpower.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
that's definitely this environment that I came from. Also, was like this feelings of honestly, I feel like there's this multi-generational pattern. Like I had this enormous feeling. I was used to be paralyzed by this enormous feeling of guilt that I wasn't doing more, no matter what I was doing. Like always, this
Mm-hmm.
crushing feeling of guilt, which I think, I mean, it may have always, this may predate, it may have always been like that, but I have this very distinct image of my grandmother, who my dad was born in 1935, so he grew up just in the beginning of the Holocaust. My grandmother had been this very impassioned like Jewish organizer and businesswoman who like gave it all up to be a mom because it was 1935, so she had to change diapers, and that was,
Mm-hmm.
she's a woman, she should be at home, and she was so ill suited to that and just so full of rage and despair while her cousins were getting murdered, and the
Yeah,
US was
yeah.
pretending this wasn't happening. I feel like that just made this big imprint and like was passed down. So like just this feeling that it can't possibly be, and this sense of guilt that I am not do not have enough willpower to just make myself do the right thing. That's like so distinctive, and
Yeah.
as a family pattern, and like particularly like has come up in cases where I'm like, I've seen that in relatives where I'm like, this makes no, like, where you see it from the
Yeah,
outside
yeah,
and you're like,
yeah.
this makes no sense. You clearly like either like you're sick, you should be resting, why are you beating yourself up for, it's like you're going out of your way to beat yourself up for this anyway. And I came to the conclusion that like rather than having the model that like it was about I learned about, I think when my wife was studying psychology as an undergraduate, she taught me about what they call the fundamental attribution error in psychology, which is the pervasive the pervasive and empirically false tendency we have to attribute, and you can do lots of experiments where like those
Mm.
clever psychological experiments, you set things up and trick
Yeah,
people,
yeah.
and so you can observe, and where people attribute the behavior of themselves and others to character
Mm-hmm.
when actually it is clearly determined by circumstance, by like the situation,
Mm.
right? So
Okay.
you can easily say, people will say, why did they do that? Oh, because they're this kind of person. But actually, if you set up the situation slightly differently, you can completely get them to do the other thing, which is, I think, also how stage magic works, right?
Yeah, yeah,
In a
yeah.
way, like we're so influenced by
Right, right,
circumstance.
right.
So this idea that like, oh, maybe instead of when like things didn't work out, rather than being like, what's wrong with me? Why don't I have this internal compulsion to do the
Right.
thing? I'm like, what if I just rig the external environment so
Right.
that like, what if I assume I'm like lazy and selfish and easily distractible and have the attention span of a,
Nat.
a cocker spaniel that just chugged
Yeah.
for 3 espressos, like, and what if I assume that that's the case and try to construct a pinball course that will have the distracted lazy cocker spaniel like end up accidentally writing, like that's, you know what I mean, like it turns out to be
Yeah.
much easier to treat the problem from the outside and like arrange for, you know
So I agree with all of that in theory, right? I have I have not managed to internalize it, right? So I my conscious brain
yeah.
is completely with you, and my unconscious brain is like singing that surface pressure song from Encanto, right?
Oh
That
yeah.
like,
Yep. Yep.
so
Like the drip drip drip.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Just like it's just and even and it is ridiculous. People literally every week come up to me and say online, in person, Marianne, I don't know how you do everything you do. And in my head, I don't say this out loud, but my response is, but I'm not doing enough, right?
Right.
Which
Sure.
is ridiculous. I mean, it's on the face of it ridiculous. Anyway,
So clearly you need your miraculous gifts taken away for 6 months.
Well,
That's the Encanto solution.
Okay, but I don't know how to do that either. So what I'm trying to do is, I guess I'm trying to
May
rig
not
the
be as
system.
strong, but I'm getting wiser.
I'm trying to rig the system in a couple ways. So one way is trying to set as an explicit goal, I am bad at relaxing. I have to relax, right? Like that is a task. And
Sure.
and then it can be one of my tasks. Oh, Marianne, you haven't done your exercise for the day, and you haven't done your relaxing for the day. Please go do those, right?
Yes,
before you're allowed to work again.
You're gonna get in trouble. That's right.
So it sounds so goofy when I phrase it out loud, but
I love it.
So that's one thing, and then I guess the other thing, this is about getting myself to write in a, part of what's nice about longer works is that you can is that you have something ongoing and it's easy to fall back into, right? And one of the challenges with short pieces is that you finish them and then you have the whole startup energy again that you have to find over and over and over again. So so I've been trying to think about, okay, what is a way that I can not have to deal with the startup energy costs? So having a big world, an ongoing storyline, etc., is probably helpful, but also have it be very low stakes. So, and
I mean, low stakes.
Low stakes professionally, right? So, it's not like
not like somebody's waiting on a deadline.
Not somebody's waiting on a deadline, etc. But I kind of think I need the little deadline. So you can tell me what you think of this plan. I was actually going to post about it later today on Facebook and ask people to vote. So my plan was to, I don't know if you're familiar with Alexandra Aaron and her Magic University series.
I don't think so.
This was something she was writing and just posting online. They were super fun. It was like decades ago I found her work. At a time when not many people were doing this kind of thing, and it's not fan fiction, it's her own original work, but it kind of lives in that space, right, of just posting it online for people to enjoy, and if you want to tip her, you tip her, like send her a little cash. And it was all of these,
although decades ago that probably wasn't possible.
No, it was
tipping people in 2002. Okay.
Yes, there were mechanisms for it back then.
All right, go on.
Not as effective as Patreon, but there were mechanisms. So her thing is set up at like a magical university with lots of sex. So it's, lots of fun, smutty scenes with character building things in between. I don't think there was like a big overarching plot. It was like college stories kinds of things, and they were super fun. So I was thinking, if I set out to do something in that mode, but link it to Patreon to give myself some motivation and be like, all right, if I can get 100 people to pledge to support this, then I can justify dedicating time to this. And like, I don't know if it should be every day or 3 times a week. I promise to send out 1,000 words of this story thing, right? Because I've been doing this thing for the vegan cookbook where I said I was going to do 30 days of vegan serendip and post a recipe every day. And it's actually got me cooking vegan food a lot more, which is good for my family's health and budget and all of that. So I guess I'm saying I'm very motivated by this kind of structured thing, right? And I missed
community and interaction
and so on, but like, it is really helpful to me. So when in that idea of like trying to construct the pinball machine or make things go downhill or whatever it is, I'm like, what are the things I can set up as pressors, right, to like point me in the right direction, right? Like,
right. Well, and it's clear that you thrive on like community connection and like putting stuff out. Like you like
Yeah.
you often send stuff out
Yeah, yeah.
for for constant. I think that I think the question there, that the only trap I see is like, is this, so if you have a fun, like I'm writing a story a week or whatever, are you essentially in your internal like world of guilt? Um, can that be instead of, or are you adding that on top of the other things that you expect yourself to deliver? Because it is actually going to take some of the time. I mean, it might
Well,
unleash more energy, of course, but also like it may be a trap if you're like, I'm going to do that and
yeah.
then just make just as much progress on like the big novels or whatever that like are in the background. Like, unless the idea is to take this and then do a fix up, or
I think the idea is to do either get short stories out of it, or and
yeah,
then a book of short stories, or a fix up novel out of it at the
yeah,
end,
yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah, well, I mean,
uh,
if it counts as a main, it
yeah,
seems like,
yeah.
I mean, writing a story
I
every
also
3 days seems intense, but like
right.
if that's on track for what you want to do, then if that's going
Well,
to count
maybe
as,
not a complete story, like 1,000 words of a
yeah,
story, right? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah,
that's an hour of writing, right? Like I feel like I should be able to do that. I have the time. It's
yeah,
just making
sure,
myself do it, right? So, and I actually, part of it is that like I have finished a novel which I'm about to send out to agents. I have,
hmm,
finished the screenplay and put it in the hands of
right. So it's
someone.
a good time.
It's a good time. Like I'm at this point where it's time to start a new project, and it
Yeah,
could be another, just write another novel, but
right. But it's very powerful to do things in community. It's very powerful to do
yeah,
things. I mean, like, it's also dangerous because I do feel like if I show things to people too early, I don't then end up finishing them. I don't think you have that problem, but I
yeah,
have the problem that it's sort of like like at that point it's like the motivation was to get, like I was doing this in order to get
yeah.
the praise, or the light in somebody else's eyes when they get it or whatever. And I got that, and I'm like, all right, well, I don't need to write the rest of it now.
Now, see, that makes me want more. Yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, Octavia Butler
yeah.
said that that's why she didn't write outlines,
Mm.
because if she wrote a detailed outline of a book, she didn't need to write the book. Like, she was writing to find out what happened. If
No,
she
no.
knew what
So
happened, she didn't need to write it.
yeah, yeah. I have that.
Sort of similar.
No, it is, well, so I would agree with her on that. I can't do a detailed outline because it kills all the energy for
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
But
yeah,
the feedback from others, and the like, oh, I really like this, I want more.
yeah.
People telling me they want more of my writing is like the best
Right, right.
motivator, right? That
Yeah,
that
yeah.
will send me
Well,
right back to the
I'm not
computer.
saying it's the
Yeah.
same. I'm just saying
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a somewhat similar uh vibe that
Yeah. Yeah.
you have to delay the gratification,
Yeah. Yeah.
in certain
Yeah.
cases. Um, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I mean, that aspect of it sounds really good. I don't know. Yeah, you should go for it. I think I mean,
I
I
mean, it
think I
could,
would the other thought I have is that it would make sense to structure it as a not as a necessarily as like, I'm going to do this forever, but like have a declared like endpoint where you're like, we're going to do this experiment, like I'm going to do
right.
this for 3 months, and
That
then
makes
we're going to
sense.
see or
Yeah.
whatever, and then reevaluate and do another one if you want, or take a break from it or whatever,
Right.
because
Right.
yeah, I mean, just to set up expectations,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know what it'll be like. So
Yeah. No, that sounds great. And at the end point, well, everyone will get a copy of whatever it is. So,
right, right.
all the supporters well. So, whatever it may be at that point,
Sure.
maybe you'll get a
And they got it,
novel,
and they got it all on the
and they
way, and
got
they got to
drafts
have,
along
and
the
they got
way.
input and
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I think that's good. Structure good. So we've been talking for almost an hour. Do we want to pause, do an
Take
intermission,
an
come back?
intermission. We're supposed to be we're supposed to do that.
Yes, yes.
That's good little podcasters.
Okay.
Do an intermission.
So we're going to pause. We'll have a break for a message from our, whoever we have a message from.
Whoever we have a message from.
Yes.
It'll be a surprise. Surprise
we'll,
message.
and then we'll be back. Yeah.
Or possibly no message. Sometimes we say, and now a message, and then there's just music, and then it continues.
Yes.
We don't know. It's like it's a surprise.
Yes.
Open the wrapping paper. Find out what's inside.
Okay.
Welcome back.
Hey. All right. So we're back from intermission, and Ben and I were.
We hope you enjoyed that wonderful intermission, whatever it was.
Whatever it was. So we leave that in Darius's capable hands.
Exactly.
So We're back and we are talking about well, we were talking about finding writing time, I guess,
Time.
um and motivating ourselves to write.
Yes.
And
Lots of downhill slides.
when I was telling Ben that 2 nights ago, oh, I didn't tell you this, Ben. This was super exciting actually. 2 nights ago, I was at the opening reception for an exhibit at the South Asia Institute, which is a fairly new museum in Chicago that is featuring three of my poems as part of the exhibit.
Oh,
So
wow.
they're
Nice.
like printed up in beautiful
Oh,
format,
wow.
and they're in
Amazing.
conversation with a particular visual artist's work, and they're on the walls
Cool.
of this thing, and they'll be there for until June. So if anyone
Wow.
coming to Chicago, stop by the South Asia Institute, 1925 South Michigan Avenue, and check out the exhibit Testimonies on Paper. It's a conversation between poets and artists.
So
So
cool.
yeah, it's really cool. I'm like, ooh, this is artists have a cool deal. Their stuff like stays up on the
Yeah.
walls in this beautiful space for months at a time.
It's
You
also a
know,
weird deal. Like the art world is so strange in a way.
yeah,
Like it's so
yeah.
interesting. I mean, I did a couple collaborations with my friend Ethan Ham
Hmm.
back in the day, one of which is now part of the permanent collection of the Australian Portrait Gallery.
Nice.
Which is odd because neither of us are really portraitists exactly. But it was a algorithmic computery thing, and then I wrote a bunch of stories to go with the pictures that it had found on Flickr, and I don't know, it was like a whole thing, a whole weird conceptual thing. But what's funny about it is that was the maybe I've said this before, but like whereas usually I'm used to the world of writing where it's a post Gutenbergian like I wrote some words. We're going to print as many copies of those words as or pixels as we can get people, like more people reading it is good. Like give them more. Like, oh, more people want it, we'll print more. Take these,
Yeah.
read them, pay us for each one. And the funny thing about being this project, which was effectively similar, I was writing some stories that were being put in a book, but like we were promising to only ever make 100 copies of the book.
Hmm.
Part of what you're buying is the promise that there will never be a 101st copy, which is a
Right.
very weird like corner of the visual art, like a sort of inherited from like
Yeah.
the scarcity of like this is one
Yeah.
of the few things that this artist did. I don't
Yeah.
know, it just
Yeah.
struck me as very funny.
No, it is. It's interesting, right? It's a whole. I mean, we do this with books. I mean, there are limited release editions all the
Yeah,
time. Um,
yeah. Those
but
shade into that kind of mentality. But
yeah,
usually
but
those are like limited editions, and then there's a non-limited. It's like a version. It's like what you're paying for is like, okay, this is the limited, like this is the embossed, beautiful,
right.
but like
Are
doesn't
you?
feel
Did you guys actually promise you'd never do a different edition of it?
well, no, I guess it was possible to. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
definitely that art object was like signed and
Hmm.
numbered. It was like each one we
Yeah.
signed them, and it was like one of 100, three of
Right.
100, like that.
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying the words would never appear
Yeah.
anywhere else or the images or
Yeah.
whatever, like some other, but like
I
it's
did
just
that.
funny that that artifact
I did that
was
when I did the Kickstarter
yeah
for Stars Change. I think we did 100 copy hardcover limited
yeah
edition, and
yeah
I saw so it goes one out of a
yeah.
hundred, two out of 100, and so
I
on.
mean,
Anyway,
I guess it's not only in the art world, but it struck me as
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
a funny kind of a thing. Um,
Anyway, what I was going to say is that I got a ride home from one of the artist guests at the exhibition who had turned out works in academia. We had a lot to talk about, and he has a 1 year old and a 6 year old. And so he's got an academic job, he's doing administrative work, he's also a working artist, he's and doing gallery shows, and he's got young kids. And I was just thinking, like, oh yeah, I don't know how I got any work done when I had young kids. Like I did
yeah.
somehow.
Yeah.
But it's
In a
and
way,
it's
it's energizing. I mean, it's
I
incredibly
guess,
stressful, but
but it's incredibly stressful. There really is, like, they have such high demands for
yeah,
your time in terms, like,
yeah, completely.
they can't put on their own coats. They can't take off their own
Oh
coats.
yeah.
I
Oh sure.
remember, like, when I have two kids, Anand and Kavi, and Anand is younger. And when Anand in kindergarten learned how to like take off his coat and hang it up, I was like, oh my God, this is a
Milestone.
milestone. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
This is huge.
Sure.
Like a little bit of my time has just come back to me.
Yeah, but
Um,
that's true. And yet at that same time, there is also this way in which the richness of those interactions when they're little, which can be completely frazzling and leave you drained, and it
yeah.
can totally be that you have nothing left. But also sometimes it's very energizing and grounding. And you know what I mean? Like there's a way in which it's like, well, how did we write in those days when it seems like we shouldn't possibly have been able to? But
Yeah.
I mean, the very I wrote as I'm sure I've said before, I've wrote a Siege of Cranes,
Hmm.
10,000 word novella, like literally with Aviva in one hand, typing with the
Yeah.
other hand. When she had just been born, and it was like, and was not sleeping, and like
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
nuts. But at the same time, that was so like it also like we talk about the cost, but there's also this way in which it was like that week I wrote so much and so fluidly, even underslept and with a baby balanced in one hand, because all of my anxiety about my place in the world had vanished. Like, and I know your experience
So,
having a newborn was very different, so I'm
yeah.
not trying to trigger you, but I'm not saying this is everyone's experience. I know you had the
Yeah. Yeah.
diametrically opposed experience, but there's a way in which I just felt not like relaxed and like it was easy, but like grounded
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
some way, and like I don't know. So there's something I don't know. It's like
No,
it's
no,
a different
I know.
kind of relationship.
I don't think I had that experience there, but I know the
Yeah,
kind of thing you're talking about
yeah.
because there's, I'm not going to get into all the details, but there have been various crises happening in my family and so on recently, which have been exhausting. And
Mhm.
as a result, I have very little anxiety left over for writing. Right? You know,
Right.
like I have
Used
used
all the
up
anxiety up. That's
all
it.
my emotional anxiety is like used up.
Used up.
I'm just like, oh yeah, I can write. Who cares? You know, like
Right. I think
so
that's it. It's partly it just puts things in perspective. It's like, what am I
yeah,
stressing out about? This is so much bigger, right?
yeah,
Like this other thing
yeah,
that's happening, so
yeah,
much more hugely consuming.
yeah,
So then it's like it's quiet in my brain. Like, you
yeah.
know what I mean? Like that's I don't know. And
Right.
yeah, and I mean they were
Although
just
for anyone with an infant listening to this, I will say you don't have to write with one hand.
oh no.
When Cubby was born,
Oh,
I had a baby Bjorn
like strap her on.
and
Yeah, well that works
strapped her
too. Yeah,
on,
yeah.
and then you get two
She
hands.
was colicky, so that I needed to do a particular hold
Hold. Oh, okay.
to
All
like
right.
apply pressure to her stomach.
And
Anyway, whatever.
it was actually but it was great. The first 3 months was Cubby just slept, right?
Yeah,
Like
well, that's nice. That's
she just
yes.
slept against my chest, and then somewhere around like
It is amazing when
3 months
sleep
old,
against your chest.
she got like she was starting to move more, and it got harder to type.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yes. When they sleep on your chest. Well, the other thing is that when they sleep on your chest, I would just go to sleep immediately too. Like that's the most soporific experience having a baby sleep on your chest. I was like, honk. Um, uh, the yeah. But anyway,
so they get
Viva
bigger.
was not a sleeper. They do get bigger. So now
Yeah.
I'm at the other end of that, and
Right.
mine are now 21 and 19,
Hmm.
22 and 19. Sorry, Viva.
And
Uh,
and
and
mine are 13 and 15, so I'm a little
yeah,
ways behind them,
yeah.
but
Well, that's the
yeah,
whole
yeah,
thing too.
yeah.
Um, and now what's funny, we were going to talk about this too. What's funny is that I have been having all this like anticipatory empty nest grief for the last 5 years where I'm like, oh, and then they leave, you've had, and I think I
Mm,
said this, that it's like a divorce in a way, except one
mm,
that you plan for, which is a positive result. Like a divorce
right.
is like you and maybe perhaps you intended to stay together forever and then it didn't work out and now they're leaving and it's sad. And in this case, you intended to like raise them up and have them all go off on their own and be independent and it worked and now they're leaving.
Yeah.
But it still is like somebody had in your house all the time and then they leave. Anyway, so they have, I mean, they've been away at various times and Viva was just in college in the Netherlands for like 3 years. She's about to graduate. But what's funny is there's been this whole back and forth. Like originally, like I always thought initially we thought they'd go to school in Switzerland because hey, it's like basically it's very cheap by American standards,
Right.
free. I might offend
Hmm.
Swiss people if I say it's free because you have to pay for your room and board and like there's some tuition,
Right.
but like for Americans, essentially it's not
Yeah,
really
yeah.
free, but it's for American standards. Um, and the then we were in America and we realized how much they flourished under the American educational system. They were in the DC public schools and they were having the best time, like
Mm,
learning and growing so much because the downside of Swiss education is very regimented and
mm,
particularly when they're younger, just very much they're not interested in what you specifically think. There is a bunch of stuff that the class it's also very communal as opposed to individualistic. There's a bunch of stuff the class is going to master. They will not leave any children behind. Also, if you are ahead, you can learn patience because you
Right.
are to stay with your class. So there was definitely like, like you are going to learn all the things and we don't really care what you think about them. And, then they got to America and people were like, how do you feel about math? And they were like, oh my God, this is amazing. So then I was like, oh crap, they're going to want to go to school in America. Like I didn't plan for this. So we started like furiously trying to save money in one of those tax protected things so they could go to University of America. And Aviva came close to deciding to go to University of America, but in the end, she decided to go to university in Holland, which is kind of a best of both worlds scenario, which was sort of a liberal, broad education and European prices. So that's great. Also, it was the right distance away. Like she was 13 hours away by train, which is a lot, but it's not a lot that she can't come home for a weekend. She once did did just one weekend, 13 hours there, 13 hours back for the bat mitzvah of a kid who she'd tutored and babysat, and it's like a heroic gesture. She came for that one weekend to be at this bat mitzvah. Anyway, so that was great, but she was away. But now, plot twist, Noah is basically at this point his front runner is University of Basel, partly because he wants to be. So one thing is he wanted to be in the play, and the way they do the plays is that you rehearse the whole year, and then the play is the beginning of the next year. So if you're a senior, you spend the whole end of the year rehearsing for this play, then there's summer vacation, then you come back and you're in the play. But if you go to America, you can't be in the play. So he says he outsmarted himself. His Swiss side Swiss side outsmarted his American side, because he applied to the couple of schools where, including University of Chicago, by the way, where he could actually
start later. Yeah.
Start later and therefore do the play and then go. And he got waitlisted at University of Chicago. But then he was like, well, I'll hold off on applying to the others. And then he was basically like, he realized that like if to apply to the other schools that don't start late, he would have to take a gap year. So he was like, well, I'll take a gap. Maybe I'll take a gap year. I'll do some stuff, whatever. And then like, I'll go later. But he's already old because Swiss school is already later, right? So he's already 19 now. He'd be 20 after a gap year. And then he was like, well, so after he made that decision, he was like, well, while I'm having this gap year, I could take some courses at University of Basel. Maybe I should find out what that was like. So then he looked it up. And then it dawned on him, wait a minute, a bachelor's in Switzerland is 3 years. If I do an American degree with a gap year, that's 5 years. I could the thing that he didn't like about Swiss university is you have to pick one thing and you could basically only study that. But he was like, I could just keep starting courses and dropping out. I could spend 2 years starting different courses and dropping out and then restarting and then eventually pick what I want to do and do that for the last 3 years. And I would still finish in shorter, like it's the same amount of time, and also not cost the bazillions of dollars that an American college education costs. So now it looks like he's going to be at University of Basel, and Aviva decided that she maybe wants to also do a master's degree in Switzerland. So they're like all going to be here, possibly in this house.
Sometime in the next year, I need to have a conversation with you about what's involved if an American kid wants to go to school in Europe. Like,
oh yeah,
do they have to like move there and establish residency and
Well, I'll tell you that for the Netherlands, I think that there are 2 price scales, and we did get the cheaper price scale, but it's still like the University of Groningen, where Aviva goes. Even if you were coming from, I don't know what establishing residency looks like, and you might actually have to be a citizen, but or a permanent resident, like green card wise. But maybe not a citizen, but even for like an American to go to in the Netherlands is like maybe $10,000 a year. Like it's not. I mean, it's like state school prices. It's like in state school, like you know what I'm saying? In state school prices, resident prices, even if you're not a resident.
But now she doesn't speak Dutch or German.
Oh, it's all in English.
It's all in English.
Particularly in Holland, what they did in Holland, in the Netherlands, technically Groningen, not Holland. I keep saying Holland. Holland's only part of the Netherlands. Come to find out.
Right.
I apologize, Dutch listeners. So they kind of intentionally decided this would be an export industry for them. So they kind of produced a whole bunch of they retooled a bunch of things within. Now, some of the courses in some of the colleges, some of the faculties teach in Dutch, but they have like a bunch of colleges, particularly the ones that are sort of progressive and like American curriculum oriented, where you can like try out different things and do liberal arts and like follow your dreams and live on a campus. Like all the instructions in English, and it's like 60% of the students are foreign, like from all over. So
all right, we're not quite there yet, but she's Cubby's a sophomore sophomore in high school, and so we've started getting like the postcards in the mail from like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
last one was from Barnard, and like
right.
consider us, and we're like, oh, we've saved up some money.
Yeah,
We're hoping
but
they
it's a
get
lot.
scholarships.
Yep.
It's stupid a lot. It
No,
is.
it's very
It's
dysfunctional.
it's
The American
very hard.
system is very broken.
It's very hard to justify spending that kind of money, right? Like even if we have it,
Yeah.
it's just like, is this
Yeah.
really a good use of money? I don't.
Well, especially if you have some what depending on what the alternative is. Part of the problem is that America has has very feeble vocational education. There's not really a lot of things you can do. I mean, there are
Right,
things, but like in Switzerland, if you're a florist, you spend 4 years learning to be a florist, you have a florist degree, and everyone will always acknowledge you as a florist, and you're first in line for any job as a florist. You know what I mean? We
right,
have like this actual job security
yeah,
based in unions because the Swiss unions are
right,
strong. And like, in most of America, it's like college or hustle.
right.
Those are your options.
Yeah.
Um,
And there are, I mean, Kevin and I
there
teach
are
at
some,
the state school, so there are
yeah,
state universities that are affordable, and we get half off
yeah,
tuition if they go there, but
sure,
we want them to have choices,
yeah.
ideally.
Anyway,
So,
yeah. So anyway, it's kind of funny for me that they're. I mean, I'm sort of delighted, and also I feel like, and I've been having these conversations with them about what that means, and like there's this narrative, there's this, the all the I don't know, it was the millennials who like after the 2008 crash like didn't have the money to like moved home after college, and they're like,
mhm.
oh, my kid's back in my basement, and there's this sort of crisis of faith in American consciousness where all of the I don't know boomers and maybe early Gen Xers, I don't know whose parents were those. Anyway, we're freaking out that like their kids had like failure to
Mhm.
launch, like they're back
Right,
in there in
right,
the basement, like oh my God,
right.
what's happening in their life?
Yeah,
And
framing it as
and
a
that
failure. Yeah,
and that strikes me as so weird in a like broad cultural context because most people for most of life in most of the world have like lived in communities, then they grow up and become a part of that community as opposed to being like launched like in a catapult. Like it doesn't, you know
right.
what I mean? Like, and there's always been travel, and even in the Roman Empire
Hmm.
you could go be a legionnaire and end up living 1,000 miles away
Right,
from home. But like most people are like, I live in this town, and so I'm going to also live in this town later. Like that's not
right,
such a weird thought. But whereas we treated it like, and also like even like extent like a lot of places in the world I've been where there are where the way villages work is that like your kid gets married, you build an extension on your house. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, yeah.
you build some more rooms because like that's like
But doesn't that seem class-based to you, and kind of like in Oak Park where I
in
live,
which direction? Oh yeah, no, sure, of course.
like in Oak Park, like
Yes.
there are lots of
Very
people
class
who
based.
have lived here for multiple generations,
Oh sure.
and it's a
No,
pretty,
this is a specific pathology of the American middle class, maybe even upper middle class. I don't think
I
it's
would
a
say upper middle class, honestly, like because that's what I'm saying. Like lots of my neighbors
yeah,
have solid middle class jobs. They own
yeah.
their own homes, et cetera, so on, and have lived here for generations, right? And
Yeah.
it's a
But I still think America is more. I mean, that's true. In fact, I remember we had this conversation on the podcast, and you were like, Americans, I forgot which way it was. You were like, Americans move less or more. Anyway, whatever. I don't know. I remember we looked it up.
I think, yeah, it's
Whatever.
something.
Uh,
I've been surprised at how many of my students have never left the town where
yes,
they
yes.
grew up
But it
in.
is true
So
that Americans are tend to be like correcting for class is the big determinant here,
right,
obviously.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but first of all, even like in Switzerland, everybody stays in their town, even if they're not. I mean, I don't know, super rich people, but you know what I mean. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it doesn't seem as strong an effect. And I think in America, there's also just a lot of dislocation and mobility. I don't know. Like I'm thinking of Nomadland. You see Nomadland?
I
Like
don't know.
that where like this company town closes and it literally disappears. Like it become like they
Mm,
all these people went and lived there because they were working on this iron mine or something. Then they close the iron mine and all those people just are
yeah.
scattered. And that feels like a big part of the American experience, even if it's not. Of course, there are lots of places that there are communities and people are
I mean,
multi-generationally.
there's
Anyway,
also the pull of the big cities, right? And like, you
yeah,
can't keep them down on the
right.
farm, kind of thing,
Right, right,
right?
right.
So
And that's a thing that happened for a long time in American culture, and it's now happening in other places. I mean, now that's like the biggest migration of humans in world history or something is like people in China going from the countryside to the cities. But like in America, that started in like the mid 19th
yeah,
century and was like this massive, the whole country mouse, city mouse, that
right.
whole mythological thing, but
Mm.
where the people go into the cities. Um,
So
looms large in the American
so you don't
imagination.
have that kind of mindset in Switzerland. Like I'm thinking, like
Yeah, no.
like from talking to my sisters in their 20s and so on, it was this kind of conversation about like, I mean, they were doctors, so they were going through the match system for their first jobs,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they had to figure out like, do they want to be aiming towards big cities, East Coast, West Coast, middle of the country, or
yeah.
are they okay with smaller cities, towns, etc. And
Right.
so it feels like there's a period for Americans, like upper middle class Americans, maybe in their 20s, where they're expected to think about this and
Yeah, yeah.
make some
And I think
preferential
and I think it's
choices.
I mean I think a clean class marks it enormously, but I think there's also an option for America. Like the idea, it's
Yeah.
American, very American, this road movie idea. You throw your stuff in your car and you go, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that. So obviously the risks and costs are much higher if you don't
Mm-hmm.
have the means. It's different.
Right.
Daddy flying you to spring break is different than like throwing your stuff in your beat up old car and getting the hell out
Right.
of town. Those are different experiences. But still, this underlying like
Yeah.
at least mythological idea of American mobility is very alive and well. And the Swiss have just as, I mean, for one thing, Switzerland is particularly weird. Switzerland isn't necessarily representative of all of Europe. I think that if you're talking about a big country like, France or Germany or Poland, you probably have it's not as big, but now that there's the EU, people can move around. And so there's beginning to be more mobility. But that is not historically the case in Europe, first of all. The EU, the Schengen, the idea that everybody in the EU can work everywhere else in the EU is new and contested, like Britain just left over it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like a relatively new phenomenon. And then Switzerland, not in the EU, although they do have that deal where they can, you can go work bilaterally kind of with Switzerland, but Switzerland sort of kind of has all these deals with the EU. But Switzerland's also tiny. Like you
Mm-hmm.
can't be like I was just had lunch with my niece. She's in Lugano. That's as far as you can get from Basel. That's the other side of Switzerland. Like that's the other side of Switzerland from Basel. It's 3 hours by train.
Yeah.
Like that's as far as you could be. I mean, if she gets a good train, sometimes if she gets a bad train, whatever, maybe it's 6 hours. But like, if you time it right, you can get anywhere. I mean, not anywhere, but two big cities.
So
Um,
I wonder if that's a big piece of it, right? Just that like the country is smaller, right? The European
it's
countries
smaller,
are physically smaller, and it's a bigger deal to like leave your
right?
country than to,
And they're smaller and they've grown up. And there's a way in which the other interesting thing linguistically in America is you could there's a big swath of America where
mm,
if you're not a professional linguist, somebody and you're at a 7-Eleven and you're not a professional linguist, somebody could hit you over the head, put a bag on your head, fly you 1,000 miles and stick you at another 7-Eleven, and it would take you a while. Like if you listen to the
yeah,
people
yeah,
around you asking, "Are you all right?" This guy just dumped you in the 7-Eleven. Like you would not be able to tell from their voices where you
yeah,
were. That's
right.
I mean, now maybe if you're like literally in Brooklyn or you know,
Yeah,
or
yeah, 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 yeah.
somewhere deep in Louisiana talking to people who've grown up there, you would be able to tell. But like, there's so much. Whereas the Swiss people, they can tell your zip code by your accent. I'm
Yeah.
not kidding.
No,
Like
no,
they get like,
my mom can do that for Sri Lanka
yeah,
too,
and
right? Like
that's a
it's
kind, and that's interesting because I think that's kind of an quote unquote. I don't know if these how much I like these terms, but sort of old world, new world in the sense of perhaps I should say places that have been sources of emigration over time and places that have been like for longitudinally over the last century have more exported people or more imported people, places that people where places where many people were like there for a long time and like
Mhm.
they just over 1,000 years they just develop these micro specificities, whereas countries that had this enormous influx of settlers, like America and Australia and Brazil, probably like people moved around a lot, and it's like a mishmash. You don't have this micro accent of like some places you do, but in a lot of places it's like because of this social mobility and because people were coming from different places when they got there, like like particularly in the West, like in California. I don't know if everybody's a transplant, but there's a lot, right, Liz? Like
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
like a large. There are places in America where there's a preponderance of people whose grandparents are not from there, right?
yeah,
And that means that there's not that. Whereas in Switzerland, like literally, Allschwil has a different accent than Binningen. That's like too tiny. Like
yeah,
that's
yeah,
populations of 10,000 people in a town. They have a little different. They have a different accent than the next town over. The other thing is that there's the country city thing. Switzerland does have the country, but because everything's so close in, and also the way that Switzerland grew, which is more Switzerland's been sort of urbanized for a long time, right? Like since the 1400s,
Mhm.
it sort of started coalescing into cities. And the way that Swiss cities look, like in an American city, America has all these metropolises. And if you're in a
Right.
metropolis, like you start out in the center of the metropolis and start driving, you'll drive for like, 20 minutes of like city, like
Right. Yeah.
asphalt and like occasionally a park. And then you'll get to inner ring suburbs. And then you'll get to
Hmm.
outer ring suburbs. And then you'll get to eventually the country where there'll be like farms, and then eventually you'll get to wilderness. This is like, if you're driving from the center of DC out to
Yeah.
Manassas, that's like an hours until you get to like now finally there's mountains and wilderness. Switzerland is marbled, right? So Switzerland is like I leave my house and I go by like a cow field with cows and like pastures and like the rugby field where people are playing rugby and then like the electric company and then like the prison and the train station and the financial center of town. That was 10 minutes by bike.
Yeah.
It's like all marbled little, like every
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
town became like what's essentially a suburb. It's got a church steeple and like an inner ring of like it's got a town center that dates like 100 year to
So
300
I
years
don't
old, whatever. Anyway,
I don't
so
know.
yeah,
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I'm curious. Do you not have population density causing pressure to, have more dense buildings in the
Um,
centers of
I
town?
mean, there are.
If
I mean, they
if
just built a Roche Tower. There's like some prestige, like skyscraper. There's like Basel has like two skyscrapers that are sort of like prestige projects of
no,
the
but
of
but
the
but
pharma
not
companies.
but not like you're running out of space. You don't have that feeling
I
of.
mean, it's not. I mean, I, that is a really interesting question to answer. There isn't this rhetoric like we're running out of space.
Yeah.
Switzerland is one of the part of Switzerland I live in is I think depending on how you cut it, because it all depends on mixing and matches and how you cut a
Hmm.
metropolitan area. But this is one of the most densely populated um, large chunks of land in
Right.
the world, probably. Right? Like, I mean, the if you take the area, like if you carve an area that is basically the lowlands of Switzerland, of like from
Hmm.
Basel to Bern to Zurich to Lucerne, that's basically all. I mean, there are like farms and like
Yeah.
parks and like there's lots of forests and whatever, but like as an aggregate, that's a pretty densely populated area. I mean, it's not Bangladesh, but it's like you know what I mean. But it's
Do you
like
know? Yeah. Yeah.
but it's very densely populated by European standards, I think. But it's not again, it's like any given square mile of it is not that densely populated.
So
There's just a lot of square miles that are
yeah.
semi-urban.
So that's interesting because so Oak Park, where I live, is suburb right outside Chicago. We have a population of, I should know this number because I'm an elected official. I want to say around 54,000 overall population in Oak Park right now, and and it's we are constantly having conversations about density and about
Mhm.
because there are we do get a lot of population pressure for
Yeah.
people from Chicago moving here for the schools,
Mhm.
and it's a convenient place to live if you want to have a house and a garden because we're on the train line, so you can be in the city in 20 minutes at your job.
Yeah.
So it's desirable, right? And the conversation that we're having is about, people have been here a long time who are used to the single family home areas, and the character get very upset when someone wants to build a tower building, a condo or whatever else. But the urban planning people are saying, well, this is like the most equitable, the most eco-friendly
Yeah.
thing is to have more density, especially near the train stations, in certain parts of town that are kind of like the hub areas. And then you can have less
Yeah.
density going
I mean,
out.
I won't
It's just
say
a huge part of the conversation here. It's
I,
constant.
I think yeah, I think I'm yeah, I'm familiar. I won't say that never comes up in Switzerland. I have definitely
Mhm.
seen local referendums. Switzerland's very direct democracy from the federal to the national to
Right.
the local level that pretty much any group of citizens get enough signatures can like get something on the ballot all the time. So there's always things. And I'm not saying that there are not sometimes fights over whether to build a particular thing or whatever. But I feel like they don't have the kind of charge that they do in that I've experienced in the US, also in
Mm.
DC and everything. And I think honestly that partly is because a lot of what the conversation in America that's overtly about population density is partly really about segregation. And like there's this
Yeah.
just the fact that if you have a place, if you have a place that has this vast difference in equity, like this vast difference in the
Yeah.
quality of the schools, this vast difference in the quality of the water, like whatever, if you could drive like 30
Right.
miles and all of a sudden like your risk of dying greatly increase,
Right.
like that's just like that's this enormous, like talk about pressure. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
pressure, but it's
Yeah.
not like literally the number of people. It's that you have all of the you have some place that sequestered resources
Right.
that is very nice, and then some places that are really suffering nearby, and like everybody would move from place A to place B. And I
Yeah.
just don't
Yeah.
see that here. Like there's definitely like when I used to joke that when I lived in Bern, I spent a lot of time when I first moved there driving around, like biking around the city, going to different parts of the city, like learning about Bern. And after I lived there for 2 years, and I felt like I've been everywhere. I was like, I just had this nagging sense that there was something I was missing. Like there's a part of Bern I haven't found yet. And then I realized, having lived in American cities and whatever, that after a while I was like, oh, I'm missing the bad part of town, like what I
Yeah.
grew up thinking of, and that's,
Yeah.
and I want to
The
like specifically underline that the bad part of town
yeah.
is an
Yeah.
extremely racist and classist concept, but like
Right.
the part of town that would be suffering there, would there be blight and boarded up
Right.
shutters, and like the
Yeah.
police, people
Yeah.
would be afraid of the police, and like where was that part of town? There wasn't one. Like it was
Right.
weirdly, you know. And because Switzerland is, Switzerland's not only Switzerland is like at the top of the heat. It wasn't a colonial power; it outsourced that to other people. The way that
Right.
colonial
Right.
powers outsourced the
Right.
the dirty work, the producing raw materials. They got Switzerland just bankrolled everybody and outsourced everything, so they don't even
Right.
have.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so but they so I'm not saying it's because Switzerland is like saintly, like they,
Right. Right. Right.
but there, there's just, and now there are like people in Switzerland. My other joke was like in Basel, like people will tell you that what the bad part of the town is, the dangerous part of the town. It's Kleinbasel, but the funny thing is that what are they? The danger they're in is of hearing Turkish. Like there's, you know what I mean? It's not
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
not
Right.
like there's a more dense part of Basel which is more higher immigrants, and people are. I mean, to be fair to those people, they're upset about the fact that like there is an educational difficulty. Switzerland has gone from being a relatively homogenous country to being an extremely unhomogenous country. It is like got twice the net number of foreign-born people as America does, like percent
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the population, and it has a large amount of immigration, which I feel like has enriched Switzerland, and thank God. But I understand that there are educational challenges if you're transitioning, if you were educated
Sure.
for a classroom where everybody would be a native German speaker, and you're now teaching in a classroom where nobody is a native German speaker.
Right.
I understand that that's a transition, right? So I don't mean to completely just throw under the bus anybody who's like, but like compared to America's like
Yeah. Yeah.
radical disparities and segregation, like it's like there's no, you're saying like the public transportation, people want to move there because there's nowhere in this part of Switzerland. Like I'm sure
Right.
if you go
Right.
way up in the mountains, there are
Right. Right.
places that it's difficult with public transportation, but there's nowhere you could be in the Basel surrounding area where the public transportation would not be excellent. Like that just
Yeah.
doesn't exist. So so I think they don't, that this, which is informative about what this word population pressure really means. Because Switzerland
Yeah.
certainly has population pressure. The population in Basel has increased. It has gradually become more dense even the time that I've been here. But nobody seems all that, like, as I say, there are like petty little
Yeah.
disputes
Yeah.
about like one or another
No.
building.
No.
Nobody seems that globally worked up about it, because I think that the point is it's sort of increasing in density roughly everywhere at the same time, as
Right.
far as I can tell.
Right. And
You know,
it's not that you're going to get an influx of black people and then you have white flight and you have like that. There isn't
there's
that.
nowhere to fly to, really.
Right.
I mean, there's an
Right.
influx of, there is definitely an influx. I mean, there's definitely racism in
Yeah.
Switzerland. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that Switzerland doesn't have. Switzerland has um, a huge racism problem, particularly an Islamophobia problem, right?
Mm.
They banned minarets.
Oh,
Switzerland is,
I didn't know that. Wow.
well, that's the
Wow.
downside of a direct democracy. Sometimes you get these completely fucked up, insane
Yeah.
decisions. And there is the far right party in Switzerland is
Hmm.
one of the most powerful, in some ways, one of the most powerful far right parties in Europe. Now, in some ways, it's tamed by the weird Swiss system of government, which everybody from the Bernie Sanders socialist to the
Hmm.
Trumpist reactionaries are in government together, and
Yeah.
indeed obey this code of silence where they make a decision behind closed doors and then are supposed to all act in solidarity about it, right? Like they're
Yep.
supposed to back each other up, like like mommy and daddy have decided, and then they present a unified front.
Mm.
The entire executive council is supposed to, they don't always do it, but they're supposed to present a unified front. Anyway, so that's weird, but there is a very strong Islamophobic bias. They banned burqas. They banned burqas. They
Yeah.
banned minarets. It's an insane. I shouldn't use that word. It's a conversation which is completely divorced from reality and completely about their racist obsessions. And that is because of the population pressure, if we want to use that phrase, that many immigrants have come to Switzerland, a vast number, proportionally speaking, in the past 50 years, because starting with the Italians, who were when Esther grew up, the Italians were the othered group, where it was like that was they were the suspicious, weird foreigners who, were disrupting Swiss culture. Which is funny because Switzerland's part Italian. But anyway, but they were Southern Italians. Anyway, and now it's, Turks and Tamils, and there's a lot of Tamils in Switzerland. And, and Muslims.
They tried to kill us. So, we went
elsewhere. Well, and Switzerland has a Holocaust guilt-driven refugee of the month club. Like that's part of what happens for a lot. I mean, they want workers and they want people to have all these lower class jobs. But basically, it was refugees. It's like whatever. It's the Balkan. People came from the Balkans in the 90s. They come from the from Sri Lanka during the troubles there. They came from it's wherever's late, wherever's burning.
Oh, hey, wait! I have a plug for a book I'm going to throw in here. I'm in the middle of reading Sugi Ganeshanandan's Brotherless Night. Sugi's been a guest to the podcast.
Yes.
She came on and talked about my cookbook, but she has just come out with this book. I'm halfway through now. It's terrific. It is getting all kinds of amazing press.
I want to see that. I want to read that.
Yeah. It's being reviewed everywhere and glowingly. So if you want to know more, I mean, it is set during the troubles in Sri Lanka, the 83 Black July riots, and the main character is a young woman who becomes a Tamil tiger. She becomes a terrorist. So after, and it's about radicalization. It's about how do citizens become terrorists, right? Like how do civilians become terrorists, right? Like it's fascinating. Anyway, okay, sorry, that was I want to mention. I hope we can get her on and interview her about the book. So So
friend of the podcast. I'm up for reading it. So I don't know. Anyway, that was all just an excursus on population pressure. I know I asked you a question. It's not that the Swiss don't have a racist reaction to foreigners arriving. It's that because of the way that Switzerland is structured in terms of zoning and urban planning and history, they're arriving everywhere all at once, kind of. So there's not really like a place to flee to and from. Switzerland has not mastered the bad part of town.
the wrong side of the tracks. So.
They've not really mastered that. I mean, there is, to some extent, there are more immigrant areas and so on, and that's. But I think it's a relatively new adaptation. And anyway, so you don't. At least in my I'm not. You're an elected official in Oak Park. I'm not super involved in Swiss politics. So if you're a listener who's wants to come on and tell me that I'm full of shit, because in fact this is a dominant theme. We should have Noah on because he knows more about Swiss politics than I do. Whenever our little envelopes come for the initiatives we're supposed to vote on, we all cluster around Noah, and he forbearingly, with slight irritation because he feels like we should research it ourselves, explains to us all of the issues of the day. So anyway.
Well, I don't think we should get into it this episode because we should start wrapping up, I think. But
yes,
you've now reminded me. I would be interested to talk to you about a political thing that's going on here right now, because I'm currently on the high school board, and we are about to do a major spending initiative to rebuild one of the buildings. It's going to cost like $100 million. It's a huge amount of money. And it feels weird to me to be on this side of things and like advocating for this, which I think I pretty much am. Although the costs have gone way up since it was originally proposed, which is frustrating, but that's just inflation and the pandemic and so on. So, because in my normal, on the other side of things, I'm like the union member railing at the university for building new buildings and not paying
Oh
its
yeah.
people better,
Uh-huh.
right? And so
Right.
I am
Interesting.
literally right now, we are on strike at University of Illinois
Uh-huh.
Chicago. The faculty are on strike.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm
It's a kind
teaching
of
on
double
Monday.
consciousness.
Oh my God, it's very, I mean, I try not to use the word insane, but it feels like that a little bit, like in the sense
Yeah.
of like my
Destabilizing.
my brain feels very unsettled as I try to make
Yeah.
sense of this, right? Like I'm not, it's
Yeah.
hard to think clearly about it. Um, because I think in both situations, I'm on the side I want to be on, but they're
Mm.
different
Hmm.
sides because the circumstances are
Yeah.
different in the two, in the
And there's a little bit, I mean, you always
like
have to account for like the where you sit is where you stand, right? In a way, it's like your subject position and role in an ecosystem to some
yes,
extent,
well, that's
you
what
know, has
I'm
a
trying to make
bearing.
sure, but I'm trying to make sure I'm not like, just because I was elected to the board, I
Yeah.
don't need to be that kind of board member, right?
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
I
Sure.
could be the disruptive board member. I could be the,
Sure.
the one saying we need to stop doing things the way we've always been doing it.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, like our teachers actually are paid pretty decently, and I
Hmm.
think generally paid better than the lower tier professors at UIC.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the circumstances are different between the two.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
anyway, that's a whole. Maybe we won't get back to it and get into it,
Oh, that's fascinating.
but it's a.
Yeah, and I think it's yeah. Sometimes it's also like there's also like limits. It's interesting when you're making this kind of decision, particularly if you have some power, like if you're an elected
Mhm.
official in the school board or something, because you have some power in some scope and you can locally make things better in that scope. And then there's also things beyond that that you don't have any power over
Yeah,
that maybe like if you could change the whole system, you would do a very different thing, but you only have a
sure.
piece of this system, right? And so it's kind of like, and a lot of it's overdetermined. Like, what are you going to do about, you know what I mean? Like in some sense,
Mhm.
there are yeah, so that's kind of like the local maxima, the sort of like I actually have
Mhm.
control over this area and I can make this better. um and but actually to do that I go in a direction that's different from what I would do if I were god king
Right.
of everything, you
Right,
know.
right. So in fact, like the school board thing in Oak Park is funded by property taxes, which we mostly control, right, within certain limits, but
Yeah.
it's under our power. And I have some sympathy for the administration at the university because they are primarily funded by allocation from the state, which every
Right.
year they have to go to the state and say, we need this much money,
This is why. Right.
and the state says, we'll give you 50% of that. And
Right.
then like, or
Sure.
70%, or like, and
Sure.
you don't know what the state is going to say. And so
Right.
it's
Right.
a very
Right.
different situation in
Yeah,
terms
and
of.
it's not the same as a college with a big endowment where it's like their money, in some
Right.
sense it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So we get it right now. We have a Democratic elected governor who is not slashing our budget, but
Hmm.
8 years
Yeah.
ago,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was a very different story. So
Right.
um anyway, so we should probably wrap. Is there anything that you wanted to say that you didn't get to say that you're burning to
Good
say at this
question.
point?
I don't
Um,
know. It's interesting. I'm just I'm sort of amused at the shape of this episode. It's kind of like it's an episode about zoning in Switzerland.
mhm,
The
yeah.
empty nest.
So
What is I kind of want to know. I
how we
kind of want
live
to go
and
back to
work.
that. What's
Yeah.
that? How we live and work. Exactly.
Okay.
Building yourself downhill ramps. I mean, did you have anything to say on the topic of like the kids getting bigger and like how it's changed versus when they were little and whether,
I
and
mean,
how,
sure. I have lots more time. I'm I am also anticipatory grieving. I'm like
yeah,
every few weeks, I think Cubby's going to leave me in 5 years.
yeah.
Like it's um and I'm trying really hard not to push her towards staying local,
Mhm.
which is interesting in the context of this earlier
Yeah,
conversation, right? Like
yeah,
I want her to have the world be open to her, but gosh, it would
right,
be nice to have her close,
right.
and I think it would be nice for her too. So I'm sort of like, let's go tour University of Chicago and see if you fall in love, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that would be
I
nice.
mean,
But
in the thing I was going to say, I do want to add,
mhm.
hold that thought, because I do want to add the intellectual underpinning of the thing about the moving back, which is that, it is, of course, very distinct and very class based and whatever, but there's a way in which I do feel like this um, nuclear family trumping the extended family, which is a thing that happened like as people moved to the cities and arranged marriage ended in America and whatever. And it's like, and then increasingly, right? Like
Hmm.
there's a way in which, and then, the divorce rate went up, and like there's increasingly like the way in which that's convenient for capitalism is interesting for me, particularly like highly skilled workers or whatever, that like the fact that they're so portable, the fact that that it's not unthinkable to them to move across the country
Yeah.
for like a job, right? That's increasingly the expectation. And the way that the going away to college, like
Yeah.
ritual of going away to college, if you can afford it and if you whatever, that's kind of a rehearsal for this life in which you're going to be able to drop everything and move. Like and
I,
that
I
that
would,
we
I would, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no
I
go
would,
no
I,
no
would- I
no yeah,
would,
jump in.
I'd agree with all that, but I would also add in the advent of birth control, letting women delay having children.
Yeah.
I think factors in a lot because if the
Hmm.
default had been somewhere in your late
Yeah.
teens or early 20s, you get married and then you
Yeah.
start having kids, you, I think, are going to prioritize being near your parents
Right.
for
Right.
childcare, right?
Yes,
Like
I
it
think
just
that was
makes
another big effect. Yeah, sure.
it's a major thing. And I'm most of my friends who had kids, the women had kids at 35. They had
Yep.
kids
Yep.
when they hit that point where like now or not at all, right? Like fertility is
Right.
starting to
Like, and that's an
decrease.
interesting thing about modern life, that we're essentially
Yeah,
pushing the limit of biological fertility,
right.
which is good for population pressure on the planet on
But
a global
I'm
scale, but like it's
honestly,
also fascinating.
I'm not sure I'd even recommend it in retrospect. Like if Covey asks me at 20,
Yeah.
like maybe she's in a stable relationship and is like could have kids now, and like would it be better to have them now or at 35? I'm like, I'm not sure. There are advantages to
Yeah.
having your kids when you're
Sure.
in your 20s, and like
Yeah.
sleepless nights aren't such a big deal. And
Yeah.
and your parents, your aging parents are still
Are around
young
and
enough to help
vigorous.
out,
Yeah.
right? Because
No, that's definitely
so
true. And I mean, and I think it's uh yeah, but it's interesting because those pressures still exist. And so even people who
mhm.
have the ambition, it's like
Yeah,
really hard to get all the ducks in a row. Like the way we
yeah,
live, it's like over time, like, I mean,
yeah, yeah.
I think even if you're like, yeah, I totally want to have kids at 22, it's like hard to like that's almost impossible. You know what I mean? Like it's
It would
like
be interesting.
theoretically it sounds great, but like
Yeah, you have to
the
think about like how could we structure things so that women who do that are supported in and not take a career hit. Um, and I
yeah,
think it's
yeah.
possible.
But
It's just
no, sure.
we'd have to like
But
really
also
think
just I
about
mean
it.
I think there's that, which is the most obvious thing, but also like the idea that you are just the way that things have. I mean, I'm just my daughter's 22, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
so she's at an age of like now is beginning like optimal fertility. But
Right.
like just in terms of the world she's grown up in and the way her ideology has been formed, she is so far. And I mean, this like she would have to. There's so much the world has arranged for there to be so much more knowing of herself and what she wants. She doesn't know what she wants to be when she grew up. That was not a question most people had in like 1900. Like in 1890, most
Yeah.
people were not sitting there at 22 being like, I wonder what I should be. There's so many options.
But I
Like
think
most people were not in that
but
situation.
I think your daughter may be at one extreme. Like I feel like many of my students right now are ready to have kids in their early 20s,
Yeah,
and even when I was, I met Kevin when I was 20, he was 21. 2 years later, we had started talking about kids. So at 20, when I was
yeah.
22, right? We then
I
didn't
mean,
have them until for quite a long time, but we could have, right?
I
So
see what you mean. I mean, I
yeah,
have several suspicions. One is like it is one thing to start talking about. I mean, we
yeah,
started talking about it
yeah,
then, but we didn't have until much later, and there were reasons, and it wasn't just
yeah,
like we forgot, like the topic didn't come up often
yeah,
enough. Like there were very concrete reasons that we ended
yeah,
up not doing that. So it's one thing, as I say, like it's one thing to have the ambition or the idea or the thought, like this would be great, but like just the number of ducks that have to be in a row of
yeah,
like finding the right person and having that, and our relationships. I mean, while you and I both like ended up with people who we then stay in our
yeah.
20s who we ended up staying with, like that's not necessarily par for the course, and everybody knows that. So even if
Mhm.
we ended up doing that, all those kids in your classes who are ready to get who are feel like, yeah, I know what I want to do, I'm ready to get, sure, but they also are living in a world where they know that there's a very reasonable probability they won't stay with that person, which
Yeah.
is different than the world of 1890, right? Like, it's like,
Yeah, yeah,
are they
yeah,
sure? Are we sure? Like the level of sure in
yeah,
2022
yeah.
or 2023, Happy New Year. The level of sure that I'm going to stay with this person for the level of evidence you need to amass to be like sure that I'm going to stay with this person for an appreciable amount of time,
Yeah,
like for the length of a childhood. That's that's hard to amass by
yeah.
by early 20s. I don't know. It's just I'm saying there are many factors, right?
I'm
And
not
they're
not
not,
disagreeing, not disagreeing with
uh,
that at all. So
anyway, but
I don't,
I think that the it's all it's found family is really important. It's really important that people who don't are not happy in their families of origin get to escape and find somewhere new. That is really important principle. But but on the other hand, we've also very much the extended family, like first of all, this 1950s idea of the nuclear family, like all the 1950s
mhm.
sitcoms, they're not like next door to grandpa and grandma. There's like mom, dad in a fedora, mom at home in the kitchen, and like Billy and Jane. Like that was this myth that America bought into
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
wholesale. And I feel like there's something fundamentally unstable about that structure. Like that's
yeah.
kind of not enough people to form a community. Do you know
I
what I
mean,
mean?
this is the,
Like,
this is the question that like Kevin and I have right now, is that we bought this house planning to sell it when the kids were done with school and
yeah,
use that money to pay for college and
yeah,
downsize.
interesting.
And now we're
Right.
kind of thinking like, well, if they want to come back, it would be nice to have
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
bedroom for
Yeah.
them.
Like what?
And
Right.
like so it's
Exactly.
interesting thinking like what would be, and of course obviously in South Asia the extended family is and the family
Right.
house is like the default, right?
Yeah,
So
like that's the default.
yeah.
And it's something I don't want to be overly nostalgic because of course there are eras and periods where people were very trapped and it's
Hmm.
the fact that we have more freedom is great. But the fact that that was a default is also something very healthy. Like the community being
Hmm.
larger than like that's like that little leave it to beaver model of the world. That's like so unstable. One big fight and that's over. And that's
Well,
not true in a
and
village
also
where you have like
there's,
aunts and
yeah,
uncles and you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like if it's sort of like,
there's
oh, this
somebody,
one couple
yeah,
broke up, he's
yeah,
sleeping over there now. You know what I mean? That's not the end of the community. And so
right.
there's something
And
very
there's also,
atomized about
yeah,
American
yeah, no, I
life.
agree. There is more, the tight knit communities can be suffocating, but they
Yeah,
can also be supportive. There's someone to
yeah,
notice if your husband's beating you, right? Like
right,
this is,
right,
you're not
right.
just trapped in your little suburban house by
Right.
yourself,
And that's that
right?
yeah, that's sort of the terror, like the horror of suburbia
Yeah,
the tininess of this community and this and the like anonymity of it and the
yeah.
and the
I mean,
so anyway,
yeah,
I
go
don't know.
ahead.
I'm kind of cool with I mean, I kind of want them to spread their wings and grow and do have whatever adventures they want. And I also kind of down with like being the home base for like whenever they
Yeah.
want to come back for as long as they want to come back. Like so I do and it's we have a small our house could fit in your living room. I
I
sometimes feel
know.
not exactly, not exactly, but it's a lot smaller. So it is like that is an interesting question. Like, are we going to
Yeah,
be able to like how are we
yeah.
going to? And I mean,
Right.
we were thinking,
If they come back with significant others, have kids, how many
yeah,
people
like
can you
we would
fit in
have
the
to
house?
change the model. I know this. I'm not sure how many this house can fit. So that is a yeah, like exactly. Like it's not
So
like
then maybe
a
you add on, but this takes us back to local politics. Like we have recently
oh, it's not even a
reinstituted.
house. It's an apartment. We can't add on.
But
We don't own it. We rent
right.
the
So,
top of this building. So
we recently reinstituted the right to add on granny flats here in
oh
Oak
yeah,
Park,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
that is, I'm really happy to see that. I advocated
Right,
for it because it
right,
makes it more possible for people to do
right.
this kind of thing,
To
right?
begin to
But
grow, that kind of thing. Yeah.
and it was zoned away for a long time because of class and race issues, right? So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
so it's
The
also
people,
it feels healthier to me that we're like
yes.
allowing it
We
again.
live in the top. We have the attic that I'm in, and then
Yeah,
the
yeah,
our little apartment, and then there's two apartments under us in the house, right?
yeah,
It's a townhouse,
yeah, yeah,
and the not it's not the case now because somebody got pregnant and moved away, but
yeah, yeah,
for a while the bottom two apartments were like a brother and a sister, like a brother and his
yeah,
wife, and the sister and her husband were like on floor one and floor two, right? On like the
yeah,
ground floor and the next floor. So like in Friends, like
yeah,
Monica and
yeah,
Ross
yeah,
and
yeah,
Friends.
yeah,
That was
yeah,
that's the model, and that's another kind of like, and I like that. I was like, this is very cool. Like they,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so it's I don't know.
I don't know. So
Um,
maybe keep an
Hard to
eye
work it
out
out.
for
That's
when
right. If
that
they move away,
if they
I
move
will
away,
grab
maybe.
another one. I don't know.
Yeah,
So and at the same time, it's like the reason that we always rented is that we were always like, we could move at any time. Like maybe we'll move to America. So there's a way that is also this thing that mitigates against like, being the nexus of, anyway.
All right.
That's the other thing I wanted to throw in. We should wrap.
I have to wrap because my computer's about to run out of power.
That's an excellent reason.
But this was great. It was nice. It's been a little while.
Yeah, it has been a little while.
I think we're going to be recording more often going forward in the next few months, and
I'm looking forward to seeing how Darius titles this episode.
Yeah, that'll be fun. So, excellent, and yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say. I've said it all.
Sounds good. More later.
This has been Mohanraj and Rosenbaum are humans.
Stay human or not.